Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation and also for the nice introduction. It's a pleasure for us as well to be here and to share our own knowledge about this topic of 21st century skills with you. So the concept of 21st century skills is not very new. However, it has become more and more popular over the past few years, and it's something that we've had a look at very recently. And so that's why we thought that this would be an interesting topic for this event today. And as already said, we would like to share our knowledge, but we're also very interested in your experiences with this concept and your thoughts on that. Yeah, so our talk is going to be divided into three major parts. So we're gonna start by defining 21st century skills and having a look at this concept and the 4 Cs. Then we're gonna talk about different teaching methods that support the 4 Cs in university teaching. And finally, we're going to take on a more broader perspective and also a bit of a critical perspective on the concept and also question the 4 Cs a bit. So let's start with the origins of the 21st century skills, of this concept, of this term. So actually, people and organizations, different initiatives started to think of 21st century skills at the end of last century. So in the 1980s and 1990s, there was this idea of defining core skills that would be necessary to succeed in the 21st century. Why is that? The 21st century is linked to a lot of challenges. We all know them. We've got internationalization, global competition, migration, digitalization, environmental, and also health issues. So all in all, we as a society, we face a more complex life and work environments than we did maybe 50 years ago. So there were different frameworks established in the late 20th century, and some of them you can see listed here in this table, giving a nice overview. And so as you can see, there are different frameworks, and it's very hard to tell what 21st century skills really are when you use this term, because there are so many different approaches and frameworks and models to that. So when talking about 21st century skills, it's very necessary to always refer to the right concept, or to know which concept you're talking about. But what all of these models have in common is that they all list skills, which you can see at the right-hand side of the table, that need higher order learning and thinking skills for them to be developed. So it's not about mere knowledge or information that you have, but it's about real competences. And yeah, for our talk today, we're going to focus on one of these frameworks listed here, namely the P21 framework, which is listed as number 5 here on the table. And this framework is an American one, and is made up of 3 columns, so to say. We've got life and career skills on the one hand, then we've got learning and innovation skills, and then there are also digitalization skills. So these 3 pillars of the P21 framework, which was developed by a nonprofit organization, an American one. So of course, in our context, university teaching, the learning and innovation skills are the interesting ones for us. So when we speak of these learning and innovation skills, what we really mean are the 4 Cs. So that's another buzzword or buzz term that's been around for a while. You read it very often in literature or when talking to experts from the field. So what is meant by these 4 Cs? We've got 4 skills, all starting with the letter C, namely creativity, critical thinking, communication, and also collaboration. I'm just going to briefly present these different skills one by one, and after that we're going to have a look at teaching methods supporting these 4 Cs. Now let's start with creativity. What does it mean to be creative? So on the one hand side, it means to be able to solve problems in a creative way. And in order to do that, you would have to come up with ideas on how to solve problems. So it all starts with idea creation techniques. So how do you actually get creative ideas? Then it goes on with developing ideas and working on them, develop them further, analyze them, evaluate them until you finally are able to create your own work. So that's something that we should allow students to do in our teaching at universities. On the one hand, think of problems in a creative way, but on the other hand, also to give them a chance to create something on their own. The second C refers to critical thinking. So this refers to how students deal with information. So once they are confronted with information or a text, they should be able to interpret the information, also to analyze and evaluate, but also to verify and falsify information. So fake news is another buzzword that is linked to this C of critical thinking here. Critical thinking is also necessary in order to link different information and arguments. So interdisciplinarity is very important regarding critical thinking. So we should really support students to be able to see connections between their fields or points of interest, their research interests. And critical thinking requires also questions. Students have to be able to ask questions, to identify questions in order to understand a phenomenon and also to be able to come up with solutions to a problem. Communication is a concept that is very easy to grasp in comparison to creativity or critical thinking, maybe. So it's really about effective communication, be it in spoken form or in written form. Also, body language plays a role here. So in the 21st century, communication is vital. Also regarding intercultural communication. So students should be able to communicate with different target groups, people coming from different cultures, and also in working in diverse environments. Communication is not only about communicating yourself, talking to others, but it's also about understanding other people. So listening attentively should be another skill that learners in the 21st century should have. And we've had it in the beginning, digitalization is a major topic in our society. So creating and using information materials created digitally is also another key skill, key competence that is necessary in today's working world. Last but not least, we have collaboration. It's very closely linked to communication, so it's not always easy to draw the line here, but collaboration really focuses on teamwork, which has also become more and more important in learning contexts and working contexts nowadays. So working effectively and respectfully with diverse teams or in diverse teams is something that is really necessary. So on the one hand, you should be able to be part of a team and take on the leadership role, but then it's also important to just contribute to the team goals, to take yourself back, be flexible and adaptable, and also be willing to make compromises in order to achieve the common goal that you have in a team. And again, we have this need for using digital tools in order to work in teams, especially when, you work in remote teams, for example. So also with COVID, we've seen major changes here when it comes to collaboration. So we've got international teams, teams that never meet face to face, but just work remotely via different digital tools. So that's also something that is typical of our world today. Okay, so that's the brief overview of the 4 C's and the major idea, main idea of the 21st century skills. And now I'm gonna pass on to Lisa, who is going to talk about the 4 C's in more detail.
Thank you, Beatrice. And hello, everyone, also from my side. So when preparing this talk and going through thinking about these 4 C's, going through the description, I thought to myself, now are these 4 C's really new, or are they old goals in new clothes? Now we learned that they were developed a while ago, so maybe this was also in people's minds already. Maybe you already felt the same, or maybe not. Let's see how you react when I present to you my thoughts. So we learned about creativity, the first C, and isn't that something that, for example, academics have to do? So they have to address problems. They have to creatively solve them, come up with solutions. They have, as academics, we have to develop and work on original ideas. But this is also something that we expect of students to learn throughout their studies. And in the end, for example, when they have to write a bachelor or especially a master's thesis or a dissertation, its main core is about developing original ideas and analyzing, evaluating ideas. Where else can it be found? I don't know if you've heard of problem-based learning, but this creativity is certainly needed in problem-based learning. So you give your students a problem and they work very often collaboratively on solving these problems. So this is also very often linked to project-based learning. As I already said, if you give your students the task of writing a paper, an essay, preparing a presentation, they need creativity. They need to they need to create their own work and their own ideas. And so on. So we have these teaching concepts, teaching and learning concepts, where creativity plays a major role. What about critical thinking? I hope that when hearing about critical thinking, all of you already thought, well, my work as an academic, as a university teacher, is mainly about critical thinking. So this is something that is also at the core of our teaching. It's about interpreting, analyzing, evaluating information, and understanding connections. So where else can it be found? For example, in courses aiming at methodological or methodical competences. So I, as a sociologist, immediately thought about, constructing questionnaires, working with empirical data, working with statistics. So this is where this is needed. Also in research-based learning concepts is critical thinking very important. Case-based learning, maybe you've heard of that. This is very common also in medicine, so in medical studies, where students are presented cases of patients, and they have to work with the information that they receive on their patients, and they have to come up with ideas of and diagnosis, basically. Yeah, so we do a lot of critical thinking ourselves, and we want our students to learn critical thinking. in many ways. Communication. What can I say other than it's at the core of our teaching and learning scenarios. It's at the core of what we do, for example, in this setting right now. So when we give our students group assignments, group work, it's a lot about communication. And this is also where, from my experience, students experience some problems. So they need support in coming together, finding ways of communicating. Nowadays, they use a lot of apps and digital media to communicate with each other. Simulation games or mood courts, that's something that, for example, at the University of Graz here happens at the Faculty of Law. So it's simulations of legal scenarios. And it's a lot about, communicating with each other, listening, preparing presentations, preparing statements. Game-based learning is a lot about communication, or service learning. I don't know if you practice that at the University of Mariboru. So where you establish bridges and work together with, for example, NGOs. So where you connect university learning with services to the community, with community support. So this is also a lot about communicating with society members. And last but not least, collaboration can be found again in project-based learning. So where, for example, students have to work on conduct their own research project. So they have to communicate with each other. They have to work together in a team of students. In service learning, they have to work together with members of the NGO, members of society. Again, in group work, in group assignments, it's all about collaboration. Again, in mood courts, in these simulations, there are always many people involved, be it students, be it members of society, so people from outside of the university, or also within, can also be. So after talking about these 4 C's that are very central, that play a central role in talking about 21st century skills, we want now to know from you, how do you relate to these 4 C's? Do you see yourself already tackling them? And then we would like to know, how do you do that? So do you know or practice other examples of the 4 C's? And we invite you to turn on your microphone or use the chat to come to a little exchange here.
Okay, so we have a comment in the chat. Alenka said that yes, we use ICT to support the 4C. And another comment is on the flipped-based learning, so flipped classroom concept, to support the 4 Cs. And yeah, we have another comment saying that it's nothing new. So I guess that refers to the 4 Cs. So it's nothing new. So we've done that in our teaching anyhow. Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you for all your comments and your examples. Also, thank you Borut, I think, for this comment that we cannot really separate these 4 C's. And that's actually also our point, which I'm going to demonstrate now. I've presented the 4 C's one by one, just to give a definition. But of course, in practice, in teaching, we cannot really separate them. But what we should do in order to support all of these skills and competences is really to provide student-centered teaching. So teaching that activates the learners and also makes them apply knowledge or get into talking and discussing with peers. So actually what we can say is that as long as we focus on a student-centered approach, we also focus on the 4 C's. So here I can offer application-oriented methods, where it's about applying knowledge and competences. So we've talked about some of them, for example, role plays. You've had that with the moot courts, would be one method that supports all of these 4 C's. Simulations goes in the same direction, case studies as well. Problem-based learning, we've talked about that, and also research-based learning. So when you choose a topic you want to do research on, you have to do critical thinking on which information you're going to use, which sources you're going to use. You have to be creative with the research process. Also communicate your findings in the end. And if you do research in teams, you do collaboration as well. The same goes for papers and conference contributions, and service learning has already been mentioned by my colleague as well. So you can see that it's always about all of the 4 C's in different degrees. So with the collaboration, it always depends on whether or not students work in groups or not. So you can vary the degrees of that. But other than that, it's mostly all of the C's that are addressed when doing student-centered teaching. Other methods would be, another note, if you're interested in problem-based learning, we would recommend the University of Maastricht and Aalborg, which focus very much on this approach to problem-based learning. So we put some links here if you want to look that up. Then we could also have dialogue-based learning. So it's not so much about application, but it's really about learning by communicating. So communication is emphasized here, but again, all of the other C's are tackled as well. So here we would have methods such as brainstorming. Remember, it's about finding creative ideas. So the first step would be to come up with ideas. And if you do that in teams, you collaborate, you communicate, you do critical thinking. Concept mapping is similar to brainstorming. Debating and discussing, very communicative, but also you have to come up with creative arguments and ideas to convince the other parties, and you cannot discuss or debate on your own, so you have to collaborate and work together. Another nice method would be the think, pair, share, or you could also have writing phases in between. So thinking on your own, doing critical thinking, then communicating your ideas with someone else or in a group, and then it's about collaboration. Again, for example, if you write down all the ideas together in an online tool, for example. Social media postings would also be an interesting method. So to have students post social media entries, maybe within a project to promote the project or research findings and so on. So they have to use the media, they have to communicate, be creative, also think critically of which tool to use, which social media platform, and also which information to include. Then another type of student-centered teaching methods would be peer learning. So when students not only work together, but also really support each other in learning, we would have peer mentoring, peer feedback or peer evaluation, and peer workshops. So peer workshops meaning that really students take on the role of the instructor, prepare a lesson, or maybe just part of the lesson. And yeah, communicate, be creative when designing this lesson. And maybe they can also do it in teams, so team teaching, which would again support collaboration. And then the last type of student-centered method, so to say, supporting the 4Cs would be self-study methods. For example, portfolio work, multimedia productions, presentations, and thesis and papers. We've tackled that before. So in all of these activities, students have to think, have to do research, have to create, especially when it comes to multimedia productions. For example, they could do videos where they do presentations. And again, they could do these activities in teams or not, and this then would decide on the degree of collaboration for these tasks. So here is our overview of proposed methods that we've collected for this talk. And again, it becomes very clear that you cannot just say, okay, today I'm going to focus on critical thinking with this method, because all of these methods address the differences, and most of them really cover all the 4Cs. So one message that we want to bring across is that these 21st century skills, or whatever we would like to call them, they're really very closely intertwined. And if you encourage one skill, then all the others are engaged as well, in different degrees maybe, but still they're also addressed. So you might think, well, that's interesting and it's useful, but it's a lot of work for me as a teacher. It depends on the method, of course, but if you do service learning projects, that requires a lot of work for you as a teacher, a lot of communication, cooperation with institutions, organizations outside of university, a lot of coordination. So is it really worth the trouble to engage in student-centered learning? And our answer to that question is yes, of course. And we can support this with a very recent study that we found when preparing this talk. So Limna investigated whether there was some impact of teaching along the lines of the 4Cs and student satisfaction. And the study showed very clearly that this is the case. So if you support communication, collaboration, and so on and so forth in your teaching, then students are more satisfied in their courses or with their courses. And this study also showed that this student satisfaction, this increased student satisfaction, has a positive influence on performance effectiveness. So students are actually more effective in their tasks when collaboration and communication, critical thinking, creativity is supported with the tasks. Especially creativity, collaboration, and communication have a positive influence on performance effectiveness. And the study also showed that students in general are very interested in communication, so in dialogue-based learning in class. So they want to communicate, exchange their ideas with others, and effective communication then again improves the task performance. So communication is really the core, so to say, of student-centered learning. Okay, and now we're gonna continue with our third part of this talk, where we're gonna question this concept of the 21st century skills a bit. And Lisa is taking control of the slides.
Yes, for this last question, I'm taking over again the slides and the microphone. And I'm offering the question, and I'm inviting you to think about the bigger picture and a little bit of a critical view on these 4Cs. So as Beatrice has already told you, we chose the P21 framework today to present to you these 21st century skills and the 4Cs. And this framework was developed by the P21 members, and I give you just a few names so that you can put them in context. That among the P22 members are firms like Microsoft, Lenovo, Dell, Lego, Adobe, just to name a few. So these 21st century skills, now I'm going to quickly tell you the other skills. So we heard about the learning skills, the 4Cs, critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and communication. And then these 21st century skills also contain literacy skills, so information literacy, media literacy, technology literacy, and the so-called life and career skills, flexibility, leadership, initiative, productivity, social skills. So I don't find it very surprising that these 21 members, mainly big companies, think that these are the skills that are needed to be a productive and effective member of the 21st century, especially of the workforce. Now, when we look at the life and career skills, we find, for example, that flexibility and adaptability are needed. And what is it about? It's about working effectively, being flexible. These life and career skills also mean being initiative and being self-directed. So, for example, to be able to work independently, manage goals and time, be self-directed learners. So this is a term that you might also be familiar with, the term of lifelong learning. So that we always have to keep up to date, also have to educate ourselves, do trainings, etc. Oh, thank God, there's also mentioning of social and cross-cultural skills, but in the context of work again. So work effectively in diverse teams, interact effectively with others. Then we have productivity and accountability. Again, being productive, being a productive member of society. And we have leadership and responsibility as some other aspects of these life and career skills. Oh, what do we find here? We find the point that what is understood as responsibility is to be responsible to others, act responsibly with the interest of the larger community in mind. So I already circled some of this terminology that I find rather problematic, I would say, if it's under the term of life and career skills, because to me, this is a lot about career only. So I'm asking you, or I'm inviting you to think about what is the understanding of life here, if it's about life skills. Where are the life skills that are needed? What about some more detailed social and cross-cultural skills? And it says that it's about acting responsibility with the interest of the larger community in mind. I find that problematic, because what about the interests of discriminated and marginalized groups? So we are reproducing power structures if we're not looking at, for example, discriminated and marginalized groups. So yeah, there are some, in my opinion, there are some skills, there is some major content missing here. The term of flexibility, in preparing for this talk, I came across a tweet on Twitter that says, it's a comment saying, when people say they love academia for its flexibility, I just think of a quote from a friend of one of my grad school profs. And the quote is, in academia, you work 18 hours a day, but you can work any 18 hours of the day that you want. So this was my association with flexibility. It means being very flexible with the demands of the workforce. And I'm not sure if this is really healthy and good for us to be overtly flexible. I also look very critical at these information, media, and technology skills, and as they are formulated by the P22 members in this framework, because it's about information literacy, media literacy, ICT. It's about analyzing media, but also mainly creating media using information. And I ask myself critically, what about a critical perspective on artificial intelligence, on algorithms and computers who produce new information and influence our perceptions of the world and how we explain the world? So ICT media are agents, they are co-creators of the world that we live in. But this is not addressed here in these skills, and I find that problematic. So what about reflecting digital media characteristics and effects? What about critical digital media education? So some more critical thoughts about these 21st century skills. The term skills focuses very much on the outcomes, on equipped members of society, and they seem to be very promising. So it sounds a little bit like, have these skills and you will be a successful part of the workforce. Not even society, I would say, just workforce. And a certain section of the workforce, I think, cannot be applied to everyone. Also, if you think that one aspect of life and career skills is leadership, not all of our students can be leaders in society. So what is missing also here with this term of skills is the question how to get there, how to support the students, and the focus on the learning processes is missing, and also the question of the educational conditions and structures. So do the skills as they are presented in this framework really address the question of how we can change existing inequalities and tackle the global social challenges? I'm not sure about that. Why 21st century? I already mentioned that before, and it was obvious in your comments as well. We have been tackling these 4 C's all along, even in the 20th century. This is a main part of higher education and academia. So have they not already been quite relevant in the past? And are they not already also relevant in the present? And I thought about myself and my generation. our generation's education did not prepare us for today's life, today's work life, but I would say we're all successfully participating. So maybe the difference is just that now we anticipate the uncertainty of the next few decades and the rapid change. But we are already experiencing it. And I would say our education prepared us for that. So not sure how we need this. Another point that I would like to make is putting the term of skills next to competences and education. So I would say that skills is a rather limited term. It focuses on rather fixed abilities and more on the people acquiring them rather than reflecting and changing the structures. And if we look at competences, it's already more. So we need skills for competences. But what about education? Isn't higher education, isn't university also about more than just preparing students for the workforce? So education also means developing one's personality and attitude, maybe even developing an academic habitus. And this brings me to what the German Science and Humanities Council wrote in 2015. They wrote that higher education has to focus on and ensure 3 goals: academia, employability, and personal development. And by academia and science, it's meant also producing future academics, future scientists working in academia. And then employability, of course, is important, is a topic, and also personal development. And I like these 3 pillars, and I like to look at addressing all 3 of them. And with the 21st century skills, I think there is just a main focus on employability. And if we take the standpoint of critical education and critical pedagogy, then this framework and these discourses on 21st century skills and 4 Cs are lacking some main questions. So education should lead to critical and responsible subjects who are able to change themselves as well as change society. And it seems to me that if we acquire these 21st century skills, we just reproduce the structures that are problematic, the structures that lead to social inequalities, poverty, climate crisis, etc. So we need a critical pedagogy that analyzes social and political conditions and asks for the reasons and the conditions that prevent emancipated subjects. And this is, for example, capitalism, power structures, authority, restraints, contradictions. So this is what I'm missing here, and coming from a critical education perspective, this would be a main critique on these 21st century skills. And is the question properly addressed? The question, what makes good teaching? How do we get there? How do we support students? And at this point, I'm handing over to Beatrice one last time.
Yeah, thank you. So we're actually coming to a close with our part here. And yeah, the last thing I'd like to present would be some general guidelines for good teaching, as this question that Lisa brought up on the slide before. So Before, I also already said that teaching along the lines of 21st century skills basically means providing student-centered teaching and learning. And here to close our talk are some general guidelines to ensure a student-centered teaching approach. So number one would be to make it relevant. So when you talk about new topics, new information, always consider how is this relevant for the worlds the students live in, for their everyday life? Can they connect in some ways to these contents? Number two, teach through the disciplines. Actually, I also mentioned that before, interdisciplinarity. Yeah, try and help the students to connect different disciplines, different research areas, show them where the connections lie. So this also helps them in remembering and understanding and also applying new knowledge and new competences. Number three, simultaneously develop lower and higher order thinking skills. We've heard a lot about skills and competences, so which would be higher order thinking skills, but in order to have competences, first you need some knowledge and some information. So both is equally important. Provide students with information, with texts, with basic knowledge, and then try and help them apply the knowledge, discuss the topics, and so on and so forth. Number four, encourage transfer of learning. So this really means application of the contents. We've had some examples before, project-based learning, simulations, all of these, application-oriented approaches and methods. Teach students to learn how to learn. So that's also something that's a bit missing in this concept of the 4 Cs. Have students reflect on their own learning. How do they learn? What helps them in learning? Also address that in your teaching or provide some material on that. Address misunderstandings directly. So that's a general suggestion that helps in all situations in life, I would say. So students shouldn't hesitate to ask questions if they don't understand anything. So here it's about the relationship really between teachers and students, so that students are not afraid to ask questions, maybe also stupid questions. So it's about creating the right atmosphere in the classroom so that everyone feels comfortable and doesn't hesitate asking questions. Number 7, teamwork. Of course, supports learning. We've had that with the collaboration, C in the concept, but it's teamwork supports so many good things in learning, exchanging ideas, building friendships, building connections, discussing, questioning. And number 8, of course, use technology to do all that. We've talked about that before, and you also said that you use ICT a lot to support the 4 Cs and student-centered learning. So that's clear to us. And number 9, foster students' creativity. So coming back to this C of creativity, really, but also give students the room to be able to be creative. And that would be our 9 suggestions for student-centered teaching.